Enid Blyton's Mystery and Adventure, The Secret Mountain, read by Amanda Root. A plane landed at Boluto Airport, bumping on the rough ground in the early morning sun. When it stopped, the door opened and steps were wheeled into place. At the top were 2 women, a man and 4 children. "Back on terra firma, Ruby," said the man, starting to walk down the steps. Ruby groaned. "Never again will I go up in that thing." Thaddeus's oldest son, Jack, grinned at her. "It was great, Ruby. Great? If we were supposed to fly, we'd have wings." The children's dog, Prince, a beautiful brown and white collie, barked once. "See," said Ruby, "even the dog agrees with me." Laura and Mike, the twins, giggled, and their elder sister, Peggy, couldn't help joining in too. A man came forward to greet them. "Mr. Arnold?" he asked. "I'm Oliver West. I've got your Land Rover for you." "Excellent," said Thaddeus. "Are you going to be away for long?" Oliver asked. All he knew was that the Arnolds were going to trek through the jungle to see an ancient statue. "Oh, just for a few days, and then... well, I've got to be back," replied Thaddeus. "We're getting married." He smiled at Charlotte Clancy, his fiancée. "Congratulations," said Oliver. Thaddeus turned to the others. "So, everyone ready?" "Yes," they all shouted. "Then what are we hanging around for? An ancient and mysterious statue awaits us in the mountains. Mount up!" The full moon shone eerily on the mountain of Caldera, not far from Boluto. Inside, in a temple carved out of the very mountain itself, a mysterious ceremony was taking place. The moon cast its light through the round window, falling on the masked face of a goddess. The high priest, wearing a skull-like mask and surrounded by acolytes, some with jaguar heads, others with silver skulls, was chanting. "The moon approaches the sacred ring. The time has come for the tribe to be reborn." In the center of the temple was a dark well, covered with a wooden lid, through which steam hissed. Above the well, a strange cage was hanging, and inside was a masked man. Slowly, the lid of the well began to rise. Now, the sacred cage, with its human sacrifice, sank down towards the gaping hole and disappeared. The high priest raised his arms to the moon. "Soon the moon will reveal the new goddess," he intoned. The goddess watched silently from the altar. Thaddeus, Charlotte, the children, Ruby and Prince drove towards Mount Caldera. The scenery was breathtaking, and the children were silent as they looked out at its strange and mysterious beauty. At last, the Land Rover could go no further. Thaddeus turned round. "Right, this is the end of the road. Everyone get your rucksacks." The children swarmed around the car. As Laura turned with her sleeping bag and rucksack, she saw 2 native men with spears watching them from the side of the track. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yes?" He noticed the men. "Ah, these will be the guides." He walked towards the 2 figures. "Jambo, Habari," he said. "Sanu, Yawa," the older of the 2 natives replied. "Your name?" Thaddeus asked. "Huaman," said the man. "Chauka," said the other. "Thaddeus," said Thaddeus, pointing at his chest. "And this is Charlotte, and my children, Jack, Peggy, Laura, and Mike." The younger man nodded and turned to walk away into the forest. "Come on then, everyone," called Thaddeus. "You'll be all right?" he asked Ruby, who was staying behind with Prince. "Of course," she said. "You have a wonderful time, and I'll see you the day after tomorrow." "Thanks," said Thaddeus, hurrying after the others. Ruby climbed into the Land Rover. "Come on, Prince. Let's get back to civilization." Near the peak of the mountain, the strange sound of chanting could be heard. Suddenly, a band of terrifying silver skulls rushed out from the bush and onto the forest trail. Further down the mountain, in a clearing in the forest, a mysterious creature materialized from the trees. She appeared to be human, but on her head and growing out of her fingers were the exotic feathers of a bird. The bird woman held out her arm, and a white cockatoo flew down and landed on it. "Soon the evil will end," she said. "I see people coming from afar. We will protect them." The children were settling down into a rhythm now that their legs had become used to the climb up the mountain. Huaman went first, with Chowka bringing up the rear. "Anyone for peppermint?" offered Charlie. "Yes, please," everyone answered, dropping down exhaustedly. "Thanks," said Thaddeus, looking round him to get his bearings. The children sucked on their sweets, enjoying the rest. Chowka made his way over to Peggy with a beautiful orchid and held it out to her. "From Chowka," he said. "Thank you," she said, surprised and pleased. "Let's have those sweetie papers, please," called Thaddeus. "We don't want to litter the bush." Laura turned to her sister. "Why didn't Chowka give me a flower too?" "'Cause your head isn't big enough," teased Jack. "Thanks a lot, Jack," said Peggy. Thaddeus took the sweet wrapper from Laura, but didn't notice when one of the wrappers fell from his hand and drifted to the forest floor. Ruby was busy negotiating the Land Rover across a river, but just before she reached the opposite bank, it lurched violently over a rock and stalled. "Now what?" groaned Ruby. She looked out of the driver's window and saw that the rear wheel was firmly stuck in the mud. "Oh, no!" she wailed. "That's all I need! Stuck in the mud in Bolo Bolo land!" Far away from Ruby and Prince, deep in the jungle, the party of Silver Skulls moved stealthily through the trees. As the children, Charlie and Thaddeus, trekked on through the forest, Huaman stopped and looked warily at Mount Caldera through a gap in the trees. "Come!" he said suddenly, gesturing in another direction. "No, wait!" Thaddeus said, getting out his compass. The needle swung right round towards the mountain. "Fascinating," said Thaddeus. "Huaman, what is that mountain? Can we take a closer look at it?" Huaman surprised them by his reaction. "No!" he cried out violently. "Hapana Masuri! Not good!" "Oh, all right." Thaddeus gave in. He gestured to Huaman to lead on, and they started up the forest track once more. "Chowka," whispered Jack, curious. "Why wouldn't Huaman go near the mountain?" "Evil god live there," said Chowka. Almost as if it heard them, the mountain seemed to rear up again through the next gap in the trees. Further up the mountain track, and heading down towards Thaddeus and his party, the terrifying figures of the Silver Skulls crept silently through the trees, closer and closer. Peggy was feeling tired and stopped, leaning up against a tree. "I'm tired and hungry," she said. Chowka appeared unexpectedly at her side, offering her some strange-looking fruit. "Eat," he urged her. Tentatively, Peggy bit into it. Then she smiled. "Oh, it tastes fantastic!" "What about us?" asked Mike. "Peggy first," replied Chowka. "Now you." And he distributed the rest of the fruit. They walked on again, all thinking how well Chowka understood the bush. "So, Chowka, what's the name of your tribe?" asked Jack. "Traka," replied Chowka. "Is it a big tribe?" asked Peggy. "Once," said Chowka. "Now just Huaman, Chowka, and Aya." "Just the three of you?" Peggy asked. "Yes," said Chowka, and his face suddenly looked sad. "Why's that?" asked Jack. "All dead. Evil god in mountain killed all trackers." "Oh, I am sorry," said Peggy. Jack took a bite of the fruit Chowker had given him, but he made a face and let it fall to the ground. Peggy caught up with her father. "That's terrible about Chowker's tribe, isn't it, Dad?" "Yes, but it's much more likely to be disease than evil spirits that killed them." "Well, I still think it's very sad," she said, looking back at Chowker. Behind, on the forest trail, the Silver Skulls were gaining on them, sliding like ghosts through the trees. One of them stopped and picked something up from the track. It was a sweet wrapper. He waved it at the other Silver Skulls. They continued in the same direction as the Arnold family group, closer now to their prey. Thaddeus, Charlie, and the children trudged wearily behind their guides. Suddenly, Whammon stopped. Ahead of them through the trees, they could see the mountain again. Thaddeus frowned. "I thought we had been moving away from it." "So did Whammon by the look on his face," said Charlie. Thaddeus got out his compass again. The needle swung immediately once more in the direction of the mountain. Far away, Ruby was becoming desperate. She put some small branches under the back wheels of the Land Rover in an attempt to stop them from skidding on the muddy riverbed when she tried to drive it out. Then she climbed back into the driver's seat. After a couple of goes, the engine roared and the wheels spun. But it was no use. She was stuck fast. Back on the jungle trail, a white cockatoo watched the children from a tree as they appeared below him. One by one they passed underneath the tree, but no one noticed him, except Laura. "Look, everyone! There's a parrot!" But the rest of the family showed no interest. Laura was about to start after the others when the cockatoo dropped right down onto her shoulder. She screamed, surprised and delighted at the same time. "Isn't he beautiful?" she called to the others. "He just flew down onto my shoulder. I'm going to call him Snowy." "It belongs in the wild," said her father, turning round. "Oh, Dad, please," pleaded Laura. Thaddeus hesitated. "All right. Whammon says we're about 5 minutes away from a good resting place. Then the cockatoo goes. Understood?" "Yes, I suppose you're right," agreed Laura, and they set off on the track again. Unseen by the group below her, high in the trees, the bird woman folded her feathered arms over her face. Whammon and Chowker led the party to a good resting place by a stream and lit a fire. Everyone settled down beside it to eat their lunch. "Now, go easy, everyone," Thaddeus warned them. "If you eat everything now, you'll go without later." As the children munched their food, the cockatoo picked up Laura's red plastic spoon in his beak and flew off into the trees. "Wait! Come back!" Laura called to the bird, running after him. The cockatoo flitted ahead of her from branch to branch. Laura stumbled on. The others didn't even notice her leave the fireside. Not far away, the Silver Skulls threaded their way through the trees, hot on the heels of Whammon, Chowker, and the others. As Thaddeus, Charlie, and the children were resting by the stream, suddenly Peggy looked round. "Where's Laura, Dad?" "I've no idea," he said, getting up. "Laura?" he called. Laura was still chasing the cockatoo, but she didn't realize she was getting further and further away from her family. Panting from her efforts to keep up, Laura ran out of the trees into a clearing and froze. In the center of the clearing stood the mysterious bird woman. This strange figure drew closer to Laura, looking deeply into her eyes. Then she spoke. "Peace. Do not be frightened." What do you want?" stammered Laura. "Listen. You must take care. Danger." And into Laura's mind came an image of some terrifying-looking people, wearing masks and carrying burning torches. Then another image flashed through Laura's mind. This time it was of a priest and a cage which was being lowered into... The scene went, and Laura's mind felt like a misty cloud. "Evil approaches you. Danger." "Danger?" whispered Laura. Believe in the bird. The bird will protect you. The cockatoo, murmured Laura faintly. Close your eyes. Laura's eyes closed as if in a trance, and the cockatoo shrieked. Back at the camp, Thaddeus was very worried. Laura! He called urgently. Chowker began studying the ground. Here! He called to them, and he beckoned. Thaddeus and the others followed him into the jungle. Soon Chowker reached the clearing where the bird woman had been. There was Laura, alone and sitting peacefully. Thaddeus knelt down beside her. Laura? Laura turned her head and said, "Oh, hello, Dad. Are you ready to move on now?" "Are you all right?" "Yes," said Laura. "Just felt a little bit sleepy, that's all." "Well, if you're all right," said Thaddeus, "shall we get moving again?" Laura nodded. "Good. Come on, everyone." And they all started back through the clearing the way they had come. Suddenly, the cockatoo flew down and landed on Laura's shoulder. "Hello, Snowy," said Laura, smiling. Further up the mountain trail, the Silver Skulls had found the fruit that Jack had discarded. They looked at each other and then headed off once more through the trees. Thaddeus and his children returned from the clearing to the resting place in silence. They started to gather up their gear. "Laura," Thaddeus called, "remember that bird stays behind." "Oh, Dad," begged Laura. "No argument." Her father was adamant. Quietly, Chowker came up behind Laura. "I take," he said gently. But as he took the bird, it flew away from him and came to rest on a nearby branch. Whammon nudged Chowker. "Go!" And without another word, Chowker led the way along the bank of the stream to a suitable fording place. Standing in the refreshingly cold water, the group splashed their faces. Peggy waded over to her sister. "What really happened back there?" she asked. "I don't know," Laura murmured. "I think I saw a woman with feathers all round her face." "Bird woman!" cried Chowker. "She good! Come on, you lot!" Thaddeus was eager to get moving again. The group gathered themselves together and set off with Whammon in the lead. The trees were beginning to thin as he took them out of the denser part of the forest. Suddenly, Whammon stopped dead in his tracks. "Back!" he ordered. "What do you mean, back?" said Thaddeus. In the distance, the eerie mountain towered above them. "Home!" "Home? But what about the statue?" "Home! Go home!" repeated Whammon, and he started to walk back the way they had come. Thaddeus turned to Chowker. "What's the matter with him?" he asked. "Evil spirits draw us to the mountain," Chowker murmured. "Tell him to move on." Thaddeus had lost patience. "He won't go," said Chowker. "Well, you take us then," ordered Thaddeus. "No!" Chowker shook his head. "Thaddeus, listen to them. I've got a feeling they're right," said Charlie. "What are you saying?" Thaddeus turned to her in surprise. "I'm nervous," said Charlie. "I think we should go back." "The kids don't want to go back. Do you?" he asked, turning to his children. They looked at each other, embarrassed. "I'd like to go on," said Jack, not wanting to upset Thaddeus. "Me too," said Mike, not wanting to be shown up by Jack. "Peggy?" asked Thaddeus. "I don't know." "Laura?" "Go home!" Laura cried. "I think we should vote on it," said Charlie. "OK," he said. "Hands up all those in favour of trekking on to see the statue." Thaddeus raised his hand, then Jack. But no one else did. "Mike," said Thaddeus, "I thought you wanted to go." "I do, but—" Mike looked unhappy and torn. "All those in favour of going back?" asked Charlie. Slowly, all the others raised their hands. "Right, you win," said Thaddeus. "Sorry, Dad," said Peggy. Thaddeus looked at his watch. "OK, we'll make camp for the night and go back in the morning." High in the trees, the white cockatoo watched them, his head outlined against the mountain looming in the background. Back at the Land Rover, Ruby was still stuck. "It's no use, Prince," she cried, desperately revving the engine, again to no avail. "It looks like you and me are here for the night." Prince licked her face comfortingly. Ruby put her arm round the dog. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" The moon began to glint eerily on the Silver Skulls as they approached Thaddeus's camp through the dense forest. "I was looking forward to seeing that statue," said Jack, as he sat with the other children at a small campfire a little way from Thaddeus and Charlotte's sight. "I feel I want to go on," Laura murmured distantly. "Well, why did you vote to go back then?" Jack was exasperated. "I want to go to the mountain," said Laura emphatically. Jack turned to her in amazement. "To the mountain?" Suddenly, Laura seemed to come down to earth again. "What?" she said. "You said you wanted to go to the mountain," said Peggy. "Did I?" The children looked at each other. Laura was as bewildered by her behaviour as the others. She just felt compelled to go to the mountain. It was almost as if she could sense the stealthy movements of the Silver Skulls as they made their way towards the camp. A short distance from the children, sitting by their own small campfire, Thaddeus and Charlotte were talking quietly together. "You know," said Charlotte, "I think I might be getting fed up with all this." "All what?" asked Thaddeus. "All this adventuring. I love the kids and I'm looking forward to being a mum to them, and I'd like it if you were around too." "I'll be there," Thaddeus said. "All the time, I mean. Not disappearing halfway round the world 10 months of the year." Said Thaddeus. Exploring was in his blood. It was the only thing he loved doing. What would he do if he gave it all up? He gazed pensively into the flames. Laura had been sitting by the fire, half asleep, when suddenly she spotted the cockatoo landing on a branch near their camp. "Snowy!" she called out delightedly, and started to run after the bird as it flitted from tree to tree ahead of her. "Laura, come back!" shouted Peggy. "We'd better get after her. Come on, you two," said Jack, and the three of them set off after Laura. A little further away, unaware of the children's movements from their camp, Thaddeus and Charlotte were still sitting by their fire, talking. "Don't worry, Thaddeus," Charlie was saying. "I love you just the way you are." Thaddeus reached out his hand to take hers, and suddenly felt a stinging pain. "Ouch!" he yelped, clapping a hand to his neck. "The mosquitoes are pretty carnivorous around here." On the edge of their campsite, shadowy figures motioned to one another in silence. One of them put his lips to a blowpipe for the second time. "Ah!" cried Charlotte, clasping her arm. "You're right!" But before she and Thaddeus had time to say anything else, they collapsed unconscious on the ground. Silver Skulls poured into the camp, bundled up their hostages, and began dragging them into the forest. 3 other Silver Skulls fired poison darts at Wammen and Chowker, lying asleep on the ground. They were hauled up and dragged after the others. A little while later, the children emerged from the trees and crept back to their tents, unaware of Thaddeus and Charlie's absence. "I did see Snowy," Laura said to Jack. "Well, he's gone now. If he was there at all," said Mike. "He was," cried Laura. "Shh," said Peggy. "We should be asleep. Come on, all of you, get to bed." Grudgingly, they turned to crawl into their tents. As the children zipped themselves into their sleeping bags, oblivious to the terrible things that had happened on the other side of the camp, the moon rose, casting its mysterious light on the forest. Thaddeus and Charlotte were dragged through the bush, their hands bound in front of them, led by 2 Silver Skulls each. Thaddeus craned his neck round to try and see Charlie. "Are you all right?" he called to her. Her 2 guards dragged her forwards with a jerk, and she let out a scream of pain. "Don't do that!" shouted Thaddeus. He wrenched himself free and hit out at the Silverskulls, holding Charlotte. During the struggle, Huaman motioned to Chowker to escape.
Lin! Da! Go!
Chowker slipped unnoticed down a gully bank and hid in the bushes. As the others were dragged forwards again, he sped off through the forest in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Thaddeus managed to untie his neck scarf and drop it on the trail. The Silverskulls led their prisoners towards the mountain. Soon they reached a great rock carved into the side of the mountain. A Silverskull pressed a section of the rock face and it rolled aside, revealing a tunnel. Thaddeus, Charlie and Huaman were dragged inside the mountain and the slab of rock face ground shut behind them. The guards shoved their captives along the tunnel. They finally reached the end of it and were marched towards the prison cell. Suddenly, their eyes were caught by an awesome sight. In front of them was a high priest, robed and masked, standing by a young goddess. She was attended by weird figures wearing jaguar-head masks. They were chanting at the moon, the light of which poured into the room through a round window, their voices rising to a blood-curdling pitch. Unaware of Thaddeus's and Charlie's capture, the children slept snugly in their tents. Peggy was the first to wake the next morning. She crawled sleepily out of her tent and trotted across to the other side of the camp. Nothing. No one. There was no sign of Thaddeus, Charlie, or the guides. Frightened, Peggy called to the others, "Laura! Jack! Mike!" Laura and the boys heaved themselves out of their sleeping bags and poked their heads out of their tents. "Dad and Charlie have disappeared!" Peggy shouted to them. "Everyone's gone!" "Where could they have gone to?" gasped Jack, his eyes searching the campsite in disbelief. "The mountain," said Laura. And the children, suddenly stilled, stared at the mountain. It seemed to rise, ominous and sinister, over the trees in front of them. Then Laura pointed upwards. "Look, it's snowy!" The cockatoo dropped a yellow-necked scarf, and Laura picked it up. "Dad's neckerchief!" Peggy took the spotted scarf, and the others gathered round her. "It's Dad's all right," she said. "Something might have happened to Dad," said Jack. "We have to find him, and Charlie." The children stood together under the trees, their anxiety mounting. "Where are they, then?" asked Mike. "The mountain," said Laura quietly. And they all stared up at the mountain in the distance. Chowker raced through the trees, using all his skills and knowledge of the forest. He knew that the Silverskulls would have noticed his escape by now and would be pursuing him. He sped on through the jungle. Meanwhile, the children hacked their way through the dense undergrowth of the forest. Laura was carrying the cockatoo on her shoulder and wearing Thaddeus's neckerchief. "Shh!" Jack said, suddenly stopping. "Listen!" In the distance was the low, rhythmic chanting of the Silverskulls. "It's coming this way!" cried Mike. "Hide!" Laura told them. They clambered into the dense undergrowth, burrowing down as far as they could to be hidden by the leaves. They were keeping a watchful eye on the track through the forest when Jack suddenly sprang to his feet. "Chowker!" he cried. "We're here!" Chowker, leaping along the track, stopped dead when he heard Jack's voice. The children crowded around him. "Where's Dad?" asked Laura. "And Charlie?" "Are they all right?" demanded Peggy. "Yes, now, but when they get to the mountain, no," Chowker told them. "My hands!" Quickly, Jack untied the bonds on Chowker's wrists. Suddenly, Chowker pulled them all down to the ground. "Keep still," he whispered. They crouched nervously in a hollow in the undergrowth. Then, through the trees, they saw two Silverskulls emerge. As they both approached the hollow, the cockatoo flew from Laura's shoulder with a screech high into the trees. The Silverskulls looked up at the bird and began loping after it into the forest. The children breathed a sigh of relief and began to make their way forward towards the mountain again. "Who were those things?" said Jack. "Evil spirits," panted Chowker. Whatever they were not evil spirits, said Jack. I never want to see them again, said Peggy. You're not the only one, agreed Mike. But I just wish we could eat. I go, said Chowker. Get food. And he trotted off through the bushes. Look, said Laura, pointing to a bush. That's the same fruit Chowker gave us yesterday. Peggy was ahead of them, pushing through the bush to pick some. Ow! She cried suddenly. Those thorns are sharp! She moved away, sucking her hand where it was scratched and slightly bleeding. The others began picking the fruit, more cautious after Peggy's warning. Well, at least we know that Dad and Charlie are still alive, said Jack. Now all we need to know is where they are, agreed Mike. The mountain, said Laura, almost to herself. Far down the mountainside, in the driver's seat of the Land Rover, Ruby woke up, dazed and confused. Where are we, Prince? She murmured. Prince whined, and Ruby looked out of her window at the river below. Then she saw the submerged wheel, and her face fell. Well, we can't stay here forever, she said. Prince barked in agreement. Ruby got out her pad and a pencil. When she'd finished writing, she rolled up the paper in her hanky and tried to persuade Prince to carry it in his mouth. Pick it up, she coaxed. Go on, pick it up, hold it. Finally, he picked up the material in his mouth. Well, what are you waiting for? Laughed Ruby. Go and get help. Prince turned and trotted into the forest, the hanky dangling from his mouth. Ruby looked around nervously, now feeling very lonely without the dog's company. Slamming the door of the Land Rover shut, she watched the forest where Prince had disappeared. Jack, Mike and Laura were still gathering the fruit. Peggy was standing a little way off, nursing her sore hand. She wasn't looking too good. She rubbed her hand. Then, quite suddenly, she sank to the ground with a moan. Peggy! Cried Laura. What's happened to her? Gasped Mike. The three of them knelt round the prone body of their sister. Look at her hand! Cried Laura. Peggy's hand was blue and swollen. How did that happen? Said Jack. The thorns! Said Laura. We've got to do something, cried Mike. In first aid class, we were told to keep the patient warm, said Laura. They put some of their clothes over Peggy, trying to keep her warm as best they could. Suddenly, Chowker appeared, carrying some fruit wrapped in a bundle of leaves. The children gasped in relief. Chowker went straight over to Peggy and knelt down beside her. Medicine, said Chowker, studying Peggy's face. Where will we find medicine here? Asked Mike desperately. I go, Chowker told them. Jack, you come with me. Chowker took Jack's arm and headed off into the trees. The children knew they had to keep Peggy warm, whatever happened. So Mike went off into the nearby jungle and picked up as much firewood as he could carry. He came back to where Peggy was lying and lit a fire close to her. Then he and Laura huddled down together round Peggy in their little fire, feeling more encouraged. Far away from the children, Prince, looking wet and bedraggled, had finally made his way to a hut further down the mountainside. Padding up to the door, he dropped the hanky on the step and barked. But no one was around. There was nothing for it but to stay there. He settled down to wait in front of the hut. Inside Mount Caldera, Thaddeus and Charlotte stood together in the darkness of their prison cell. Charlotte let out a huge sigh of despair. What's happening, Thaddeus? I wish I knew, he said. Who are these people? Chowker's evil spirits, I suppose, said Thaddeus. I must apologize for doubting him, if I ever see him again. What do they want with us? Whispered Charlie. I have no idea, said Thaddeus, putting his arm round her protectively. Whatever it is, she said, it's not very good, is it? Thaddeus grinned at her. Charlie, you've got a genius for understatement. And he kissed her muddy face, not wanting to let Charlie see how alarmed he really was. If they stayed in this extraordinary place, they were in great danger. Somehow they had to escape, and fast. As dawn broke, the fire that Mike and Laura had lit to keep Peggy warm flickered out, unnoticed by the children who had fallen asleep. Over the treetops, the cockatoo appeared. Seeing the children down below him, he perched on a branch a short way away, as if watching over them. In the Land Rover, far away down the mountain track, Ruby was just stirring. Around her, the forest stood silent, threatening, remote. Great! No dog, no food, no wedding! Ruby thumped the steering wheel in desperation. "Prince, where are you?" she muttered through gritted teeth. Almost as if it hurt her, Prince's head went up and his ears pricked up as he lay outside the hut. Oliver West's truck was bumping down the track towards the hut. Prince leapt up. Oliver jumped down from his cab.
Hey, what are you doing here?
Prince barked, and Oliver noticed the hanky on the ground.
What's this, old boy?
He said, bending down to pick it up. He picked up the scrap of material and read the note that Ruby had put inside it.
Huh, looks like we've got some rescuing to do, old pal.
Oliver walked back to his truck, and Prince barked.
Come on, boy, said Oliver. Jump in.
He started the truck, and they headed back up the track towards Ruby. Thaddeus and Charlie, hungry and exhausted, lay inside their prison cell, dozing fitfully. Suddenly, the door of their cell crashed open and they sat up, dazed and shocked. Bizarre figures in jaguar head masks dragged them both from the cell and began hustling them down some stairs. Thaddeus and Charlie were pushed forward by the jaguar heads and made to kneel in a pool of light in front of a smaller flight of steps. At the top of these, on a throne carved with extraordinary shapes and symbols, sat a high priest. Silence fell. The high priest raised a hand, and the jaguar heads hurried away immediately to the side of the room. Then, with a voice echoing harshly, the high priest spoke.
"This is so annoying."
"You speak English?" Thaddeus couldn't believe what he'd heard.
"Of course I speak English," said the voice.
Then the high priest lifted off the great mask to reveal a rather small, mousy woman.
"Ah, that's better," she said. "You've no idea how stuffy that is."
Thaddeus and Charlotte stared at her, open-mouthed.
"You're British," she said, putting on glasses. "I'm really sorry about all this. You should not be here. I've expressly forbidden the Silver Skulls to take foreign people prisoners."
"So why did they?" Charlotte demanded.
"Ah, they get carried away," said the High Priestess. "Normally I wouldn't mind, but this time they were sent out specifically to look for a child, to take the place of the present goddess."
Thaddeus nodded.
"Well, since there has obviously been some sort of mistake, you'll let us go, presumably." "I'm sorry, afraid I can't do that," said the High Priestess. "Take them away," she ordered, motioning to the jaguar heads to remove Thaddeus and Charlie. With a shrug of her shoulders, she removed her glasses and heaved the terrifying mask onto her head once more. Ruby was sitting on the Land Rover roof. Suddenly, in the distance, she thought she heard the faint sound of an engine. Then Prince appeared on the edge of the forest, bounding towards her, with Oliver West's truck just coming into view behind him. "Prince!" Ruby shouted. "You made it!" Then she jumped down from the roof of the Land Rover and splashed through the river towards them.
Deep in the forest, Peggy was lying, still unconscious and moaning occasionally. Mike and Laura sat close by, watching her pale face intently. Where were Jack and Chalker? Laura thought. If they didn't come back with the medicine soon, perhaps it would be too late.